What is going on, survivors? For today's mod review, we're going to be talking about the Ark Transcendence mod. This mod basically adds a bunch of different personalities to the tames that are actually out here in the Ark universe, both wild and both tame. We'll have a link to the workshop page in the description of the video so you guys can check that out when you want to, and this affects a decent amount of creatures so far. This mod really just adds a lot of different buffs to certain creatures, both wild and tame, change the behaviors up a little bit, and we'll talk about that kind of briefly for the most part. It's pseudo kind of in depth, and some of this stuff is still a little lost to me, but for the most part, I'm kind of excited about it, to be honest with you. So let's get into the basics of what we're looking at here. So currently there's only a certain amount of creatures that are actually affected by this mod, like I said. So Kentros, Allos, Rexes, Trikes, Parasaurs, Direwolves, Raptors, Carnos, Sarkos, Capros, Pachyrhinos, Dillos, Dire Bears, the Baryonyx, the Galley, the Theri, the Giga, the Troodon, the Pachy, and the Sabertooth. That is what is on the docket as of right now. I guess there's some future plans, and there's actually a DLC expansion to this mod that's actually a work in progress, so I didn't actually cover that part. I'm just covering the base mod right now. But this affects all of these creatures. So when you tame these, when you have them out in the wild, you'll notice a couple of different options here, like this praise, scold, and disable or enable the mood indicator. So you can turn that off, and it turns that little icon that was on there originally, turns it back off. So what you'll get is this emote essentially telling you what the mood of the creature is. So this actually matters for a lot of different reasons. So there are a couple different types of moods that we talked about here. And right now we're looking at the content option is what I'm looking at, I believe. And what happened, this really doesn't do anything. This is like a normal state. This is just what this creature's chilling at. This is your normal without using this mod, what your creatures are. They're just hanging out, right? So there's actually a happy bonus as well if the conditions are met. If your health is really high up and you have like the perfect food that they would want in their inventory, they'll actually get like a happy buff, and the happy buff will mean that the damage resistance and the melee damage goes up. Now, the thing I could not figure out about this, and I've played around with a couple of the other animals that are supposed to be affected by this mod as well, is I've tried a bunch of different food types. I threw mutton in here, I threw meat in here, I even threw the kibble of choice, which is for taming this guy, in the inventory, and the mood did not change. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this is the happy emote, but it doesn't seem to be, because most creatures, if I just went out and force tamed them or just spawned them in, they start off with this icon, which would tell me that it's just the content option. I'm not entirely certain. Plus, content means that they don't have any food in their inventory, and if I were to just come here and take everything out of here, as you can see, the mood indicator doesn't change. So I'm not sure if maybe I'm doing something wrong with the happy part of this stuff, but that's how that is supposed to work. Maybe we'll spawn in another creature and try that as well. There are a couple of other bonuses as well. There is there's a couple of debuffs. So there's an angry one that if you take too much damage with these guys, or hit them, or do too much damage, or if they take too much fall damage, they'll go into an irritated state. Well, they'll get more melee damage, and a damage resistance. The damage resistance will actually go down, but they might just randomly attack you, kind of like when the Giga takes too much damage and tries to go after whatever's nearby. It kind of does something like that where it's angry. There's a tired option as well, that the conditions are met. It basically, if you sprint for too long, run it on low stamina for too long, and as you can see, the tired emote is popping up now. This means that my movement speed goes down, my damage resistance goes down, and my melee damage goes down. And the idea behind this is because because you're wearing them out, essentially. You're wearing the dino out, the dino needs time to take a break, get some health back, all that good stuff. So if we leave him alone for a little bit, we'll start to see this go back up to the content, and I'm just going to walk so that I'm not really consuming any stamina. There's an irritated emote as well, and you can see it change back to the content because we're chilling out. There's an irritated one as well that will be met if like the creature's left with like low health for a long amount of time, like well below ideal conditions for an extended amount of time. It will go into like an irritated thing, and the irritated mood will be that you actually get a bonus melee, but you have a negative damage resistance as well. And it's not anything huge. It's like small. You're looking at like 5% or like 15% in some of the when it gets like angry and things like that. It's not a huge buff, and I think the idea behind that is to not make it game breaking, but add a little bit of personality to your creatures. So if I turn my HUD back on here, we can actually see the emote up in the top right by my health bar of what it is. So you don't necessarily need to be having this emote put on here all the time. You can turn it off, and then when you mount it, you can see the emote up there too. The praise and scold options, I don't really see what's going on with that other than some animations, which is actually kind of cool. Like when you do the praise, it's like kind of like a level up, and when you do the scold, it kind of does like a low pitched growl, which is kind of cool. And that's with the aloe. There's a lot of other creatures that are affected by this too. Another thing that you're going to see right over by this Carno is the wild creatures will lay eggs. They'll lay eggs and then even have babies nearby. As you can see, the Carno is going to hang out and be very protective of the nest, usually is how this is going to work. But you'll also see baby dinos as well. Some of them will flee, but then some of them will actually try to fight you too. So they actually have a bit more variety. You know, where too often do we just see like, you know, full grown dinos, and that's all we see roaming around, full grown creatures. We don't see anything other than full grown creatures. And now you have that little option. You can steal those eggs obviously and raise them as your own. You have to believe you can even tame the babies too if you want to. If you see like the baby dinosaurs roaming around, you can tame those guys too. I say dinosaurs, I really mean just creatures in general. There's a whole lot of creatures out here. So far, I've been running this around on Ragnarok, and it seems to be working pretty well. The other thing that I have noticed is that herbivore, like packs of herbivores, like these anklos and these stegos, a lot of times they would get a bit more separated normally. They don't seem to separate as much. Like they kind of stay pretty close together for the most part, which is kind of cool to see. Like they act a bit more like herd animals. Carnivores out here will actually have, even wild carnivores rather, will have a food meter going down in the wild. And what that will mean is it will provoke their aggression even more. So if their food is way down, they're more inclined to be more aggressive to try to get that food stat back up. Which is kind of convenient, especially because it changes the behavior and makes a little bit more sense. Like as a carnivore creature, if it's full, why is it going to go out and hunt? And as we can see, even the bears are kind of hanging out together. You see a lot of this more like pairs and groups of these animals hanging out together. You don't see just like, I don't see just one bear hanging out by itself or one stego out here hanging around by itself. More oftentimes than not, they're a group of them. They're working like a pack, like a herd, which is pretty cool. I like to see that a bit more. It's a bit more natural behavior for the most part. There's no item changes or anything like that. It's literally just a creature mood behavior change, which I think is pretty impressive. I like the idea that they have a bit more personality to them. There's not a whole lot to go over with this review because it's very easy to explain what this mod is actually all about. It's very easy. It's literally just behavior changes and debuffs and buffs depending on those behavior changes for your tames and for wild creatures. And then also, like I said, the herd pack as well. It's definitely, like I said, the idea is pretty cool. The other thing I've noticed is you'll see animals out here sleeping in the wild. They'll just be like hanging out, just crashed. It looks like they're knocked out, but they're not. They're just like sleeping. Animals will go into an active sleep and then like just walking around. You see the one that's actually standing up almost like they're guarding the pack. But they'll just be hanging out around here asleep, which I think is really funny. But like I said, it's just a bit more, it just makes a bit more sense. Other than the Megalosaurus, you never see that happening. And I think that's really cool to just see these extra little behaviors going on in the animals out here in the wild. I find that really intriguing to me. And some of these animals will do that after it's tamed. They won't just do it when they're in the wild as well. But predominantly, you'll just see them out here hanging out. Like this guy is out here just snoozing around while his buddies, it looks like he's taking watch over here. They'll get aggressive if you come near them. That's pretty much how they work. Let's go find some other ones. So as you can see, there are a few animals obviously that are affected by this, and you can do the same thing. You can tame them, and then you'll be able to enable the mood indicator and then treat them specifically, and then they will be able to respond to that. So all in all, I mean, it's a fairly simple concept, right? Like, so the animals have different personalities, or a bit more personality than they usually have. Now somebody's getting a little irritated over there because they don't have any food in their inventory, is assuming what's going on here. The problem is you got to watch this, because if they get really mad, they might actually like rampage and try to hurt your own stuff. So you got to pay attention to that. It doesn't look like there's a way to like force them to sleep, at least not that I see. Like it looks like the wild ones sleep, and then maybe they sleep on their own if they get too tired. But there's no way to just like force them to do certain emotes. But like I said, you'll see some of these creatures napping out in the wild and more packed up. You'll see baby animals out roaming around, all that good stuff. I like the idea of this mod. The problems that I see is that, and maybe it just could be me, or maybe because I'm running it on single player, is that the moods don't seem to make sense all the time. Like the toggling of the moods, and then the conditions of which I did some reading, and the conditions that I try to meet to make certain moods happen don't necessarily always happen. Now, maybe that's on purpose. Maybe that's on purpose to keep things a bit more random so that a bit more unpredictable, which would make sense, but it does make it seem like either I'm doing something horribly wrong or something's not entirely right here. All in all, though, I like the concept. The idea of having a bit more personality into these creatures, I think, is awesome. The ones that we talked about earlier is that, like, the herbivores packing together makes more sense to me, and that wild carnivores go into the starvation kind of by themselves, and then when they get hungry, that changes how aggressive they're going to be in the wild. That makes more sense to me. Wild baby creatures roaming around and eggs being spawned just makes for some bit of more diversity, you know. Obviously there's a few mods that do that, but having something like that with this personality stuff just makes a lot of sense to me. All in all, I think it could be cleaned up a little bit, but again, that could be just user error at this point. I'd be curious to kind of see that, and if anybody knows, probably leave something in the comments here. All in all, I'm a fan. I like it. I don't know if it's something I would use often. I think if it were, I'd have to really be able to sit back and test this with some other creature mods that I really like running to see if it works. Things like predominantly Kraken's Better Dinos with creatures to see if that works with that function or not. But all in all, I do like the idea. The one thing I have noticed is that if you're playing around with this on single player anyway, so if you just spawn like a Capra or a Saber or any of these guys in, if you just spawn one in, they won't actually have all these options. That's something you probably want to pay attention to, and it freaked me out at first because I thought I did something wrong. So what I'll do is I'll spawn another one in and show you just what I'm talking about here. So we spawned in another Capro, and we're going to tell them to calm down. And then, like, if I hit E to go, oh no, it is there. Okay, so it is there this time. So that part you want to pay attention to. So when I first did this and spawned these creatures in, the radio menu wasn't there to do any of this stuff, to show the mood or praise or scold. None of that was there. And I was like, okay, maybe there's a different spawn code. And I tried something just willy-nilly, and all you really have to do if you're on single player is get outside of render so that they're not there anymore, and then come back into render. Now, I only had to do that with like 1 or 2 creatures, and obviously it's situational because this Capra just came in just fine. But once I did that and walked up to them, they had all the options. So if you're messing around with this on single player and you spawn creatures and you're wondering why the behavior might not be there, just leave render and come back in. It seems to be fixing the issue. The food, I think, is what I'm more concerned about, specifically with the happiness versus the content mood. The rest of the moods seem to work pretty well under their conditions. They're maybe not like immediate, but it definitely seems to happen for the most part. The difference between the happy and the content is supposed to be that they don't have a food of choice in their inventory, but their health is high. And then the happy is that they do have that food in their inventory and their health is high. I don't know what food it's specifically talking about. Maybe there's a special different type of food that maybe that's specific to each one of these creatures that got altered. I'm not sure, but I've tried, like, for instance, if it was a carnivore, I went with prime meats or even muttons of its choice, whether it ate fish or regular meat or whatever. I've also even tried kibble. With the herbivores, I've tried crops, I've tried the best berries. I've tried kibble on those too. And I can't see where there's a difference between the content and the happy. Now, I guess what I could be, I would assume that I'm assuming that this emote is the content emote, and a happy would be something of a smiley face is what we're looking at. The rest of them seem to be pretty straightforward as to what they are. But all in all, I think, like I said, it could use a little bit of touch up maybe, but I think this is also a really ambitious project for all of these creatures to respond under these tight little discrepancies. So I would, benefit of the doubt, I'd say this is probably a daunting task, and I think it has a lot of potential, and I'm curious to see if this keeps going. It doesn't look like this mod specifically has been updated since last year, which is kind of a bummer. I don't know what's going on. I've checked the change notes and some comments to try to figure that out. I haven't seen anything on there. I honestly, I can't tell what's going on. But I do know that there's a DLC expansion for this mod. Again, it's in testing phase and it's very early, so maybe that is meant to kind of balance out the rest of this stuff, and maybe we need to check that one out too. Anywho, guys, that is the Ark Transcendence mod. There's not a whole lot to explain with this one, but it does go kind of in depth when you're actually playing with it. So I would advise, I would say definitely check this one out. Again, we'll have a link to the Steam Workshop page in the description of the video, so you guys can check that out when you want to. And again, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you all on the next one.